Hello, I'm Duncan Holland and I'm your host today on RowingChat. I'd like to welcome everybody, all our participants all over the world. Host today on the first chat, which focuses on coxing, coxswains and coaching the cox. My guest today is Chelsea Dommert. Hello Chelsea, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, my name is Chelsea. I am and was a coxswain in the United States. I write a blog called Coaching the Cox, which is about how coaches can coach coxswains and how coxswains can coach themselves. And I've also written a book on the topic, also creatively named Coaching the Cox.
Thank you. Now, Chelsea, when did you start coxing and why did you start coxing? What got you into our wonderful sport?
Well, it's an interesting story, actually. I started coxing when I was a sophomore in high school, so I know that lingo isn't international. Let me think. I would have been 16 years old at the time, and I had just moved to a part of the country that had rowing from a part of the country that didn't, and my European history professor at the time was the novice women's rowing coach, and he needed a coxswain. And so I started coxing at the prep school where I was going to school at the time. After a year, after my novice year, I went to the municipal program in my city, and I was there until I graduated high school, and then I went on to Cox Division I in college.
Nice story. I like the piece about the European history teacher.
Right? He was quite a character.
Now, first of our viewer questions, or listener questions, how would you persuade someone who wants to be a rower to be a coxswain instead?
Well, that can be a difficult one. I think that in the number of times I've had this experience, and you can let me know if this has been your experience, a person wants to do that because there's somebody on the rowing team who perhaps is not very big or not very fast, and or the club needs a coxswain, and this is a person who's physically the most suited to do it at the time. The thing about convincing someone to do one over the other is that it can be a difficult leap of logic because they're very different jobs. A coxswain and a rower are in the same sport, but while rowing is, of course, extremely physically intense, the coxswain's job is largely mental, and the coxswain's job is, in fact, to take the mental element of rowing away from the rowers so that the rowers can focus on the physical part. It's really not the same skill set, and plenty of people who love doing one will absolutely hate doing the other. And I think no amount of convincing will make someone like it, whereas they wouldn't before. So your best bet really is to ask someone to just try it. You know, try it for 2 days, try it for 3 days, try it for a week. Say if you don't like it, then at the end of this time, we won't hound you to do it anymore. But making someone like it, if it's not their bag, I think isn't really the way to go about it. The best you can do is ask someone to try.
Great, thanks. Yes, I'm sure we've all been in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, now getting on to more technical things, there's a question here. What is the best way to deal with the coxswain's blind spot directly in front of you? This is obviously talking about steering an 8 or a stern coxed 4, where there's a large part of the world that the coxswain can't see. How do you deal with that?
Sure. So, the blind spot on an 8 is directly in front of the 8, and in a stern coxed 4 as well is directly in front of the boat. And the blind spot on a 4 that is bow coxed is similar to the blind spots that you have when you're driving a car. They're behind you. And you deal with those differently. I assume that the question originally addressed the stern coxed blind spot because that's the one that we talk about the most. The thing about steering in a boat like that is that coaches are always asking coxswains to pick a point, pick a point, pick a point. But the problem with picking a point in a stern cox boat is that you're being asked to aim at something that you can't see, right? Which doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to ask someone to point at something that they cannot see. So there are a couple of alternative ways to dealing with that. My favorite is one that's actually explained really well by an American coxswain, Ned DeGurcio. He currently coaches at Yale, and he explains it thusly. He says that when you're in the attack position, when you're inside of the coxswain seat, sitting with your feet planted against the footboards with your hands either on the gunnel or on the toggles of your steering, you're looking straight ahead. But rather than using your focal vision, you're using your peripheral vision. And he explains that your peripheral vision, most people don't use that much unless they're just trying to avoid stepping off a curb or something. But as you use it, as you gain practice, it becomes much easier to be aware of everything that's going on around you. So your eyes are pointed straight ahead, but you're looking with your peripheral vision at what's happening in front of you and what's happening on either side of you. And you know you're going straight when that peripheral vision of the background around your stroke seat silhouette stops moving. If it's moving, you're going back and forth. And if it stops moving, then you're going straight. Now, here's the thing. That still doesn't address the question of the blind spot. And as he points out when he explains it, occasionally you do have to, I don't know if you would call it cheating, but you do need to lean over just a little bit and peek around the bow. And whether you do that every two strokes, 3 strokes, or 5 strokes depends on the situation. If you're going down a 2K course, you can pretty much expect that that course has been cleared while you're racing. If you're in practice, though, you're dealing with other boats on the water, sometimes geese, launches, debris in the water, especially after a big storm. And so you want to be checking for those things more often. Let's say every 2 strokes on the day after a big storm or a day of high traffic, as opposed to, of course, on a 2K course where everything has been cleared. Now, in a bow-coxed boat, where your blind spot is behind you, and you of course don't have any mirrors the way that you would in a car, you learn after a while where your oars reach out to that you can't see. And this blind spot's a little easier to deal with because you're not going to hit something directly in front of you. What's going to happen if you ignore this blind spot is that you hit something on the side because you steered too close to it. You get better at that over time. But in the very beginning, when a coxswain doesn't know where those limits are on a bow-cox boat, I would recommend, and coaches will hate me for this, but I would recommend turning around and looking at the oars to figure out where they are, because I would rather a coxswain take a little longer to get accustomed to his danger zone than to hurt the equipment in the process of attempting to guess.
Great, yeah. A very good point about the equipment, I think. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So next question. If you were teaching a young rower who's interested in coxing, what tips would you give them? So what would be the first things you'd say to a beginner coxswain?
Well, the very first thing I would say to a beginner coxswain would be about safety. And I think this is universal. I don't think this is a surprise to anyone. The primary responsibility of the coxswain before anything else is to make sure that the rowers don't get hurt and to make sure that the equipment doesn't get hurt. You prioritize the rowers over the equipment, of course, but it's better if you keep both safe. A lot of coxswains make mistakes because they're disregarding the more fundamental elements of coxing and moving on to the parts that are more complex, are more advanced, are not as important, and are really beyond, and are easy, is the fourth thing, is they're easy. People ask all the time about motivation. How do I motivate the crew? That's something that we can talk about, but I feel like so many coxswains out there are looking for that one awesome call that's just going to make the boat go really fast, and everybody's going to be really excited about it. And that amazing, really apropos, like reference to some movie or something, that'll happen for every coxswain, but it happens by accident, and it's not the primary role of the coxswain anyway. So the very first thing that we're talking about is the safety of rowers and safety of equipment. I don't know how it is internationally, but at rowing programs in the United States, we have a safety video that is the very first thing the majority of programs show, and a lot of them require coxswains and rowers, actually, to see it before they're allowed on the water. It's not the best acting you've ever seen, but it gets the point across, and that would be the very first thing that I'm concerned with when I'm talking to a beginner coxswain.
Right.
After safety, and that's a big after because coxswains often aren't paying attention to the rowers and equipment getting onto and off of the dock, when they're shoving, when they're landing, and when they're following the traffic pattern on the river. After that, I would address steering. And the first thing I would address with steering, well, let me just tell you, it would not be pick a point. The very first thing that we're focused on is the traffic pattern. And in that way, also keeping the rowers and equipment safe. After that, we can move on to how to steer more optimally. And then after that, execution of calls effectively. You'll notice we have not gotten to motivation yet. We have not gotten to technical correction yet. We're just talking about the basics. Safety of the rowers, safety of equipment, steering the boat, making the calls in a way that the rowers understand.
Thank you. Yeah. Speaking as a coach here, that's, I think, a very clear explanation, and it's great to hear it from such an experienced coxswain, what you think is the core business. All right, the next question we have here is, do you consider it to be virtually mandatory for coxers to have sculled or rowed in order to be really good coxers, i.e., to be intuitive with their boats, do they need to have experienced it themselves?
Sure. So that's an interesting question. I think that you can have a passable coxswain who hasn't rowed before. And by passable, I mean that they're capable of protecting the safety of the rowers and equipment and steering and executing the calls correctly. However, speaking from personal experience, my understanding of the way that technique worked became much, much better after rowing, and there were a couple of reasons for that. The first one was that I started to realize all of the things I was asking my rowers to do that were physically impossible. Like, oh, let me think of a good one. I would ask my stern pair, now this was a long time ago, but I would ask my stern pair to control the rush of the boat, as though they were the sole progenitors of good ratio in the boat, which is, of course, not true. I didn't understand what my stern pair meant when they said to me, we can't, everyone's coming down on top of us. I didn't understand, everyone's coming down on top of us. I didn't know what that meant until I was in a boat and I felt that and I was like, oh, this is what Rachel was talking about. Or feeling those things really helps. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that once a coxswain has felt what it's like to row, and preferably to have rowed hard, they understand the mental state that rowers are in. They understand how important it is that their calls be 100% crystal clear, because the rowers are in no position to be interpreting what the coxswain might have meant while they're busy doing this, which is actually a fairly taxing activity. The third thing, and this is the one that I talk about the most, but perhaps is the least important, but the one that I talk about the most is that once I had rowed, I had an entirely new vocabulary for describing what I wanted my rowers to do. Because before I rowed, I understood what was correct rowing based on how it was supposed to look. But when rowers are in the boat, you want them facing forward. You want them looking directly ahead of them. You don't want them looking at their oars, except during a 5 to 10 stroke period when you explicitly ask them to look at what their blade is doing. And so explaining to them how it should look, the other thing is that they don't have a mirror on the water. And so explaining to them how it should look is sometimes works, but doesn't always. And then when it doesn't, you have a fallback option as someone who has rowed to explain how it should feel. You want to feel tightness in your quads at this point. You want to feel heat in these parts of your body at this point. When your body is going over, you know that your body is far enough forward when you feel just a little bit of pull in your hamstrings at the back of your legs. If that's not enough body over for correct rowing, then rather than ask you to get more body over, I'm going to ask you to go back on land and develop more flexibility in your hamstrings, because that's how you're going to develop the correct rowing technique. When I knew how to explain it to my rowers in terms of how it should feel, it was like suddenly we were speaking the same language as opposed to two different languages, and there had to be some interpretation in the middle. I want to speak the rowers' language to be 100% clear about what it is that I want with them. They should not have to think. They should not have to think at all. And if they are thinking, I'm not doing my job. By explaining it in terms that they don't need to reinterpret to understand, I make their job much easier. But in order to gain that insight, I did have to row first.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I like your point about it's the coxswain's job to think and the rower's job to row.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, the next question we have here is about respect, and I suspect it's been written by a coxswain. Respect is earned, but how do you develop the idea among crew members that when they've had a good race or good row, you have contributed? I am still trying to get over the cox as a lackey attitude here.
Understandable.
Yes,
so
we've all seen that.
Gaining respect is a hard one, and it sounds like the person who asked this question is on the right track, because I have a lot of coxswains ask, how do I get respect from my crew? But in my opinion, that's not the right question, and the correct question is rather, how do I become the kind of person that my rowers will respect? And that can have a lot to do with your attitude on a team, teamwork, whether you work out. A lot of coxswains bring a lot of smaller things into this, but the fundamental thing is that when you're a coxswain doing things right and not making mistakes, your rowers are going to respect you. It's very difficult for rowers to respect a coxswain who, for example, is commanding a boat and a rigger hits another rigger as they're going out of the house. A lot of coxswains would get yelled at for that, and people get push-ups after practice. That makes the coxswain look bad, starts the practice on the wrong foot. But that's even an extreme example. When you're on the dock and a coxswain says down to waist, ready, down, that quickly, and people don't know what's going on, and 4 people go down to waist, and the other people don't go down to waist, but then they realize they're supposed to go down to waist and go down, the boat doesn't go down evenly, but that's not a big thing. Coxswains don't tend to get yelled at about that. This is something Marcus McElhaney talks a lot about. He was the U.S. coxswain for the men's side in 2008. He won a bronze medal in Beijing. He's been on the national team several times. And he brings this up at coxswain camps, which I really appreciate, that the little things that coxswains don't get yelled at about, coxswains need to be doing right. They do them wrong, and they need to be doing them right. And that's where you start. And with practice, coxswains will get better at avoiding those mistakes and doing things correctly. And I know that that's not a tactical answer. That's not like one tip or trick that a coxswain can use. But as a coxswain is gaining experience, if that coxswain is actively working to make themselves better, they're taking a notebook with them. They're not writing in it on the water, but writing after practice what happens to them on the water, what things went wrong, how can they avoid those things in the future. and become an autodidact in their own coxswain education, then rowers will see that. And rowers may not comment on that the same way they wouldn't comment on little mistakes, but they will respect it. They always do.
Great. Yep. Good answer. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the next question we have here is a perennial one that coaches often ask as well. Is there a difference between coxing men and women? And if so, is it possible to do both successfully?
Sure. There is a little bit, but it is possible to do both successfully. And I think for the vast majority of coxswains, this is not something that they need to worry about too much. This is another one of those things that a lot of times indicates that a coxswain is worried about problems that really aren't the biggest problems that are going on. It would be, to use a remeat safety analogy, like two beginner tennis players who are concerned about the tension of the strings in their rackets. It's just, they need to be much more concerned about their stance and the way they're holding their arm and how they look at the ball and how they run around the court. It's the same with coxswains. Safety, steering, and execution come first. After that, technical correction. After that, you get into a little bit of motivation stuff, but the most motivating things for rowers to hear are variations on it's working, evidence on the fact that whatever they're doing is working, that they're moving the way they want to be moving, that they're accomplishing the things that they're working on the water every day. And all of those things are the same for men and women. Some would argue that you use slightly different motivational techniques for one or the other, depending, but those things are quaternary to the primary, secondary, and tertiary things that you need to be focused on, which are safety, steering, and execution. And I would say that just as much difference between, say, a men's boat and a women's boat, you might find between a college boat and a high school boat, or a master's boat and a high school boat, or a group of people who have been rowing all their lives and are extremely serious about it versus a group of people who are really only out there to have some fun, get outside, make some friends. The differences between the specific motivational styles of different boats can come from all different types of factors about who's in the boat rather than just gender. And there are so many things to worry about before that I think it's hardly worthy of the discussion that it receives in rowing circles.
Great, thank you. That's a nice answer. Okay, here we have a more general question. Sure. How do you personally handle rowers missing practice due to other school commitments? I guess that could be any other commitments rather than just school commitments.
Mm-hmm. That's a difficult one. I know that sometimes at programs, it can be difficult to put together a lineup because there are only, say, 8 guys of a given speed on the team, and one of them isn't there all the time, but it makes sense for him to be in the 8, and so you're having to worry about whether to practice with 7 guys or whether to move the practice, and that can be difficult. I would say for the coxswain, that's not really the coxswain's concern. I don't know if a coxswain asked this or not, but if the coxswain is somehow the first person to notice this, this is something that he brings up to a coach. Now, it's a difficult thing to navigate as a coach, of course. I had the luxury in college of that not really being an issue. We had a lot of pretty fast people on the team, so if somebody wasn't showing up to practice, that was the end of their seat in the boat. And people did show up. Ultimately, I think the most that you can do is sit down and have a conversation with that person about their priorities and say, look, if you're going to contribute to this team, then we need you to make this much of a commitment. If you can't make this much of a commitment, then we can't rely on you as much as we would need to put you in this boat or to put you in any boat. But ultimately, it's that person's life, and they'll decide whether they can make the commitment to the rowing team that's necessary. But it's completely acceptable to say that this is the minimum amount of commitment to be on the team, and without that level of commitment, we can't really, we're not helping you and you're not helping us. It's a difficult conversation to have, but I've noticed that one of the defining factors among legendary coaches is their willingness, if not excitement, about having difficult conversations when they're necessary.
Great. So again, I'm speaking as a coach here, but I like that last comment, that great coaches are willing to have difficult conversations. Thank you.
It's very true.
Yeah. Okay, we're halfway through our chat here, and I'd like to remind you all that Rowing Chat is brought to you by Coxmate. Coxmate, building the best equipment for coxswains. And the Coxmate SX amplifier comes with a GPS system so that you can measure the speed of your boat and find out whether your calls are helping the crew go faster. For example, when you steer the boat, you know that the speed drops. But when the rudder is straight, are you checking that the crew is back to the same speed? With Coxmate's large display and backlit screen, you can also cox effectively even in the dark. And after each outing, you can download the speed data, and the coach can review each piece, graph your speed, and confirm whether the coxing calls are effective. Coxmates are available for demo trial from rowperfect UK and from the other Coxmate agents worldwide. Now back to Chelsea. Chelsea, how do you motivate a good rower to be a good club member? Get them engaged in things like developing other rowers.
It's a good question. I don't know if I have a really good answer to this one, but I'll give it a try. The most effective thing I've found in this, well, I can't speak in generalities because I don't have a whole lot of experience with it, but I can give you an anecdote about something that's worked for me in the past. When I was, I guess this was about 2 years ago, there was a girl who had just joined our team, and she was in the youngest group of people on the team. She wasn't a novice. She had rowed before, and she was quite fast, but she did not commit herself at that point to being a leader on the team, which was fine enough when she was in the youngest age group. But as the age groups moved up, and the next year when she was no longer the youngest person around, it became necessary for her to take a leadership role, teaching the new youngest group, or at least leading them by example, in what they were supposed to do as athletes at a university, as opposed to just regular students. And the comment that she remembers from that experience to this day is being told that on a rowing team there aren't as many members as there are on an American football team. And she's from a football heavy, I guess, American football heavy portion of the country. And whereas where there might be a few leaders who really take over the team, rowing is a smaller sport, and rowing is also a very team-oriented sport. You can't win a gold medal without 8 other people, and no one person takes responsibility for that medal over anyone else. So, rather than several very strong leadership positions on the team keeps itself together with a large percentage of the team executing with a small amount of leadership, by leading by example and taking care of those below them and teaching less experienced rowers. And that as a no longer younger member of the team, she, like it or not, was a part of that leadership structure, that she was invited to join that leadership structure, which is something that I think rowers appreciate as they get older. Now, this is a double-edged sword, because if you have rowers who get it in their heads that it's their job to be teaching other people what's going on, particularly on junior teams, perhaps not so much on more mature teams, you see a lot of individual rowers who have a tendency to get bossy or try to control the program. Actually, I lied about this only being on junior teams. I've also heard about problems with it on masters teams. I didn't see it on the college team where I was. But rather than leading by example and largely by silence, leading by telling other people what to do. And the worst manifestation of that, at least in my opinion as a coxswain, is a rower who turns around and starts giving the coxswain wrong advice about what's supposed to be happening. So as a coach, I think I would very much play up the angle of, one, you're being invited into a leadership circle because we have a large leadership circle in rowing. And two, you're primarily expected to lead by example rather than by telling other people what to do. That's largely the coach's job and the coxswain's job.
Yeah. Good call. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a question here. The listener said, I have masters at various levels and abilities. What is the best way to prep them to race?
Well, I'll preface this with that I've never coached a master's boat.
Okay.
But I've coxed a couple with different people of different levels of experience in them. The best that you can do in a boat with multiple different levels of experience in it is to focus on the fundamentals. And a lot of the really advanced coxswains actually talk about this, that they want their calls to be easily understood by any boat of any level of experience. I think for coaching, it can very much work the same way. Basically, every rower, since time immemorial, no matter how experienced, fast, amazing, winning, or revered they were, was working on their catch. Every single one would like to have a better catch. Yeah, and that's an example of a fundamental. Application of the legs is an example of a fundamental. Relaxing through the recovery is an example of a fundamental. Those are all basic things that any rower at any level of experience can afford to be even just a little bit better at. So that's the angle that I would take in making a boat with, or a team with various levels of experience faster all at the same time.
Great, thank you. Yeah, good advice to any coxswain, I think. So we now come on to something which you mentioned earlier. What do you think are the most effective and motivational calls during a race?
Well, I'll preface this the way I preface the men and women question, which is that, of course, there are much more important things in motivation. But when it comes time to motivate a crew, what they find the most motivational is not some fancy call that you brainstormed while you were watching a Fight Club movie or some such inspirational piece, but rather information about what's going on that's encouraging to them. I think the wording that I used before was variations on it's working. For example, quick catches in. Suppose you were focusing on quick catches in at some point during a race. And they started to do it. And the coxswain says, yeah, that's good. We just gained 2 inches of run. That's a variation on it's working. Keep that up. All right, we've got that extra 2 inches. It's working. We're going to take a 10 here to take a seat on this boat with fast knees down. And 3 into the piece, 3 into the 10, you've taken 6 inches. All right, we took 6 inches. That's a variation on it's working. We have a seat left to go. Half a seat on it. I'm half a seat up. I'm a full seat up. That's a variation on it's working. And it doesn't even have to be in relation to the other crew. I mentioned a run call earlier. I really like run calls. I'm very partial to them. But other things like we have the start that we've been practicing. And we get off the starting line and our start went well. All right, guys, that was a good start. It went the way we wanted to. We're getting this much run now. That's as much as we need. That's a variation on it's working. Or even something as simple as using names like, yeah, Scotty, good job, Danny, whatever their names are. Even though that's not giving them actionable information, it's an indication that you notice the effort that they're putting in, which, if you notice it, must mean it's working. That's perhaps a more creative interpretation of variations on it's working. I'm making air quotes with my fingers right now. But
that's all right. I'm in stroke seat. I can see you.
Right, exactly. So that kind of thing is what athletes find consistently the most motivational. And if we were to talk about improving a coxswain's ability to motivate a crew, I would reframe that as the ability of a coxswain to spot the changes that will make the crew faster, implement those changes, and then provide the feedback that the changes are working. That's the most valuable motivation that a crew can have.
Great, thank you. I'm going to break the rule of being an interviewer here and put my own reaction in. I wish you'd been steering when I was racing. I think your theme of the best motivation is a variation on it's working is fantastic.
Well, thank you. It's a wording that I have worked very hard on after several bad attempts in other teaching scenarios.
All right. Okay, to get back to what I'm supposed to be doing, which is getting the listeners' questions in. This is a difficult one. What do you think are the best calls when you're losing a race?
This is an interesting one. But I'm glad we're addressing it because it's something that coxswains definitely struggle with. They'll say, oh, I always know what to say when we're winning and everything seems to go great, but they don't know what to say when they're down. So there are a couple of things. And the first one is that word that I just used, down. It's by changing that word down when we're talking about the fact that we're losing, we can understand the change in mindset that we need to talk about what's going on in the boat. So rather than saying we're 2 seats down, a coxswain could say something like, similar to what they would say if they were sitting on 2 seat. When a coxswain is sitting on the 2 seat of an 8, they don't say, I'm 2 seats down from bow ball. They'll say, we're 2 seats away from getting bow ball. And there's a big difference in a rower's mind, and this is just an example, but between we are 2 seats down and we are 2 seats from 3rd place, 2nd place, 1st place, a gold medal, medal standing. That sounds much different from down. And that same idea can be translated into a lot of the other calls that coxswains make that are inherently negative. For example, I'll go on a tangent, but I'll come back to this. When we're talking about technical corrections, a lot of coxswains will say, don't do this, don't do that, don't rush, don't, whatever it is, put your blades in all at different times, as opposed to 3 seat, hands 1 inch higher at the catch. Okay, that's it. by giving them explicit instruction about where we're going rather than the places that we want to avoid, we create calls that are more helpful to the crew than just saying we're losing. So that's strategy number one, is to change your wording to be more positive. The second strategy is to recognize when another crew, I see this happen a lot, is that a coxswain will be up against a crew that's just going way faster than they are. And they just clearly are not going to catch them, but that's the only boat that they have to give reference off of. And so they're saying, oh, well, we're a boat length of open now, and we're 2 boat lengths of open now, and we're 3 boat lengths of open now. Coaches really want coxswains to tell their rowers where the other boats are, but at that point, the rowers don't care, and it's okay to just say, all right, that boat is out. That boat is up ahead, and we're going to focus on the boats around us at this time. So that's the second thing. The third thing, which is related to that, is to pick a boat that you are beating and focus on that boat. So suppose you're in 3rd place and 4th place is 4 seats down from you. The coxswain can focus on getting to bow ball on that 4th place boat, and in the process move the boat up on the next boat ahead. So then once that's happened, they can say, all right, now we're just 1 seat down from this other boat that's ahead of us, which is a lot easier to talk about than 5 seats down from this boat that's ahead of us. So that's thing number 3. And thing number 4 is to return the focus inside of the boat. Sometimes if a boat is not moving well, and of course the boat is losing because of that, the best that the coxswain can do is, as always, try to get the boat to move faster. And that may involve removing focus from the other crews for a moment to say, all right, our heads are in this boat right now. We've got this much run. If we do this, we'll get 4 more inches of run. So let's get ready. We're going to do that into whatever the technical change is and let them know if it has succeeded. If it has succeeded, that is a piece of positive feedback that has nothing to do with the other crews around them, but it's positive feedback that contributes to the morale of the boat and allows the boat to move faster so that it might be in a more competitive position against the boats to which it is losing. And even if it's not in a more competitive position with the boat to which it's losing, suppose that boat's just going to be faster, that's still something that the coxswain can use to make sure that this crew has the best race possible for this crew. Because when you're sitting 6 across, it's not like a soccer game. It's not, you don't change your strategy in response to what the other crews are doing. It's a competition next to other crews, but it's not a competition with those other crews. It is first and foremost a competition with the fastest that this boat has ever gone before. It happens to be occurring next to other crews, but it's first and foremost a competition with ourselves.
Right, that's a nice way of describing it. Good. Now, you might have to translate this next question, because certainly I don't understand it. I assume it's some Americanese.
Okay.
The question is, when or is it ever appropriate to shout freight train during a race?
All right. So this is, I cannot believe this. This is an example of a motivational call from my own youth that failed.
Okay, does someone know you?
Evidently. But what happened was my coach for the year had this theme of freight train calls and being a freight train, and how I think the idea was that once a freight train starts moving, it's very, very difficult to stop because there's a lot of inertia. Freight train's very big and heavy. I'm trying to come up with a physical explanation for this. But so that year, our entire focus the entire year had been on this freight train analogy. And so during a 2K piece, I was in one boat. I had boats on either side of me. We were supposed to come in third. We got to the 1,100 meters in. We were in the lead. And we were not in the lead by much, but we were in the lead. And the crowd was going, you know how it is. The crowd's going crazy. Like, we're really excited because, like, we're up. Like, I think my calls at that point are just like, we're leading, we're leading, we're leading, like something. And then we get to right before the final 500 meters. And at this point, we're supposed to take some kind of 10. And we've been instructed that it's a spontaneous 10, and we're going to use it to just get the boat back under control. That was part of the problem. We didn't have any technical focus for this 10. And so I call the 10, and I just scream, freight train! And everything fell apart. And all the other boats next to me just both go sailing past my head. And we came in third, and our sprint was terrible. And the call just really didn't work. And I suppose that that's an example of a call that didn't really have a direction. It didn't really have a technical focus. And maybe there was a situation in some parallel universe where that would have motivated that crew, but at that moment it did not motivate my crew. And so I get made fun of sometimes for telling that story. But I tell that story for a reason. And the reason is that no matter how much a coxswain coach or brilliant coxswain might try, put on airs of being perfect. We know that sort of coxswain affectation of being perfect. It's something we all sort of do in this tongue-in-cheek way, like, haha, I'm perfect, I know everything. Like, everyone knows that's not necessarily true. And I tell that story because I want coxswains that I'm teaching to understand that I didn't learn this stuff from a book. I didn't learn this stuff from some amazing like coxswain gene that I have in me. I learned this stuff because I messed it up before. And now I know because I messed it up before. And then I went back to my notebook and I wrote down what happened. And I wrote down that it went wrong. And I wrote down why it went wrong. And I wrote down a couple of potential solutions for how to fix it later. And I got better that way. But nobody was perfect when they started out. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and say no coxswain is even like good when they start out. No coxswain is even like okay when they start out. We all are like terrible when we start, but we make mistakes and we recognize those mistakes and we learn to get better. And I want coxswains to understand that when they make a mistake, that doesn't mean that they're bad coxswains and this is the end of their coxswain career. It means that they still have something to learn, which is all of us. We all make mistakes on the water all the time. They might just be at a different level depending on how long you've been coxing. But making mistakes isn't the end of a coxing career. It's a catalyst to getting better. Great.
Thank you for being so honest. I didn't realize I was asking such a personal question. We have a couple of technical questions now. And the first one is, how do you help a crew approach the front end without checking the boat?
That's a good question. What I find in a lot of cases is that the check doesn't really happen in the first half of the recovery. It happens in the second half of the recovery as the rowers are approaching the front of their slides. Of course, when the knees are bent, it's a slightly less stable position than having your legs flat down for controlling your speed as you approach the front end. And as you move towards the stern of a boat, a rower can feel like the weight of rowers behind them is coming down on top of them. Different things have worked for me for different crews in this scenario. Sometimes I've been able to use a verb complete with an appropriate tone inflection like creep to talk about the top 6 inches of the slide. Other times, I've been able to just remind them top 6 inches or top 3 inches. And they understand that because we've been working on it. I've used peel your heels up off the foot stretchers. So rather than lifting your heels quickly, peel them up slowly, like you're peeling an orange. And in that respect, those types of things, there's some room for creativity in figuring out what's going to work for a boat. And sometimes you're going to have to try multiple things. With that thing in particular, sometimes also people towards the stern of the boat will complain that like they can't do it because the people in the bow are preventing them, and oh my God, 3 seats so bad, like whatever, you know how it goes. I don't necessarily buy into that all the time. I don't think it's true. But in that case, a coxswain can remove the excuse by saying, okay, for this piece, let's start out with the bow pair focused on this. Now let's move to 3 and 4. Can you pass that focus to 3 and 4? Can you pass that focus to 5 and 6? Can you pass that focus to the stern pair? And something like that will work, even if it's just really a psychological tactic to get the stroke seat to stop complaining about the 3 seat. That's emotional management is part of the things that the coxswain is doing in the show.
Right, yep. Well done, thank you. We're getting a little short of time, so I might have to ask you to cut the answers a little short. Please. The next question is: Can you tell if a rower is opening their back too early or too late?
In most cases, no, not from the coxswain's seat. You can't unless it's like the stroke or 7. Sure. That's the kind of thing that you know is happening, say, because the coach, you heard the coach say it to the rower, or you've been allowed to get out of the coxswain seat and get in the launch and look at what's happening in your boat. And on some occasions, and this is why I say most of the time, no, on some occasions, a coxswain can look at the boat from the side, see what's happening from the launch, say a rower's opening their back early, and in so doing has a tendency to pull the oar into them somewhat so that the collar for a moment is not pushed up against the oar lock before they push it back up against the oar lock as they go all the way to the finish or back to the catch.
Yep. Yep.
If a coxswain then sees that correlation and sees that when the rower fixes the problem, that thing that is visible on the oar disappears, then a coxswain might be able to make the educated guess back in the boat, well, I see the collar coming off of the oar lock on this rower. I've seen them from the side, and I know what that meant when I saw them from the side, so I'm going to make an educated guess here that probably they're opening their back too early. And I use that example because that's an example from when I was coxing in Philly. But that's the only situation in which it would work. But coxswains can't otherwise really comment on body movement unless they have seen something on the oars to indicate that it's happening because, of course, all they can see are the oars.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. All right, the last of our prepared questions is, since the 2012 Olympics, there has been a surge in interest in rowing, but not necessarily from competitively aspiring people. Is this happening globally? And what does rowing as a sport have to offer those wishing for more recreational involvement?
Oh my, this is a loaded one, and this is a good one.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that rowing has a number of things to offer a recreational crowd. One of them is, of course, teamwork and friendship and all of those fuzzy things that we talk about when we talk about our teams. One of them is that it's a low impact sport, and so people can do it of all ages and can do it relatively well at all ages. It affords opportunities for travel. Regattas are really a lot of fun, but it sounds like the underlying question might be, what can these recreational rowers do for rowing? And I would argue that actually they can do a lot. And first of all, we always need a bigger fan base for Olympic team and national team events. And that's in moral support, and that's in promotion of the sport, and that's also in how do I put this? Well, in patronage and funding as well. Is that the sport, as we know, is not one of the high dollar sports like American football, baseball, soccer everywhere in the world except here in the United States, which I suppose you just call football. But we don't have that kind of a fan base for rowing, and it's really a shame on a lot of levels that national and international regattas tend to be very small. And it's nice to see your friends, but it would also be really nice to have support out there for our sport, and support for kids wanting to get into it as well, because it takes a very special kind of athlete to do it, but a lot of those very special kind of athletes are going to other sports now, and with the rise of recreational rowing, I think we'll ultimately see more really competitive athletes getting into it later on.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Okay, we're now going to move on, and the technical people are going to put a slide up requesting viewer chat where you can send in your own questions. I have a couple of new questions. I have a couple of quick ones here for you, Chelsea.
Sure.
This refers back to the blind spot. When you cox, do you always ask the bow pair to look around as if in a coxless boat?
No, I don't ever ask them to do that.
Okay. Steering's your job, huh?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and this one goes back to the male and female question. What differences do you see between men and women on and off the water? And is it more noticeable between at the club level or at the high sort of semi-international level?
I would say that the biggest difference that I noticed between, well, like I said, these are not unique demographic differences or big differences, but when, for example, at the junior level, people will say that female rowers need more like emotional, crafty calls or something like that. I would say that I would have used calls like that at that time that I wouldn't necessarily have used in a men's boat. I would have stuck to concrete feedback in a men's boat. At the time, I was not very experienced. I probably wouldn't have used the word down in a women's boat, and I would have used it in a men's boat, but now I would not use it in either boat. So this is an example of how the motivation is actually the same. I would say that when I got up to a higher level of rowing, it was very much the same, because everyone there was very serious about getting faster, and they didn't want to hear a bunch of crap out of my mouth. If I wasn't providing something that was going to give them evidence that they were faster in the form of run or lower splits or beating another boat, they did not want me talking. So I would say at the higher levels, the differences are largely negligible.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, Jonathan, do we have any more viewer questions at the moment?
Yes, we've got one more. This comes from John Hill. He asks, do you feel a recognised crew captain through whom rowers can speak helps the cox's role?
I'm sorry, feel that what?
Do you feel a recognised crew captain helps the cox's role?
A recognized crew captain helps the coxswain's role. I suppose that captain could be a helpful liaison if someone, if there were a general problem with the coxswain's attitude as a team member or something like that. But just with regard to actual coxswain skill, I believe that coxswains should be have the courage to ask for feedback, and then perhaps take it with a grain of salt, but consider whether or not it would be worth incorporating into their coxing. I don't think that they should need a captain for them to do that. But other than just the regulatory and leadership roles of a captain on the crew, I think that that's a service to coxswains as well as rowers, no more or less so than it would be for rowers.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. Jonathan's now going to put up a slide about Chelsea's business. So, Chelsea, perhaps you'd like to tell all the listeners about what you do in terms of business and what services you can offer.
Sure. So right now I do coach coxswains it's via Skype, and it does not work as well via email. So I'm going to go ahead and say via Skype, and it's typically the way I do it is I'll start with a trial week. So if there's, say, a junior coxswain or a college coxswain who would like individual coaching on how to set goals or how to obtain feedback or how to improve from the mistakes that they've made, there are very specific scripts that I've developed for asking for feedback. There are very specific methods that I've used for quantifying whether calls are working or not, and I can help a coxswain with those things. And we'll start with, say, a 30-minute consultation, and if the coxswain would like to continue doing individual coaching, then we do it by the hour from there. And so far, it's been largely coxswains who cox at school, and we've done the majority of that coaching during the school year so that they have someone addressing their individual skill set in a situation where the rowers might be getting more attention on the water.
Okay, lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, unless Jonathan's got anything else that's come in from a viewer, we've come to the end of our hour's chat with Chelsea, and I'd like to thank you very much, Chelsea, for your insights and your honesty. And Chelsea has a website which you can find her on, and if there are any further viewer questions that come in to rowperfect, we will answer them online. So thank you very much to everybody, and good morning or good afternoon or good night, wherever you are in the world, and I hope your rowing goes well.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Chelsea, and goodbye.